Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Youngman. I'm Director of Business Development for iBailey, and also one of the key players along with this team in putting together this License and Royalty compliance service. And we're very proud to be presenting today to you. From an agenda perspective, Eric and I will basically take you through a quick overview of iBailey on our firm. We'll then take you to more of a higher level license compliance program, of which the licensing, royalty, and trademark audits are a subset of that. And then I'll jump back on and I'll take you kind of through the solution on the cafeteria plan that we offer as a firm in a way to kind of help you monetize and maximize your license fees and revenues. And then our goal is to kind of finish in somewhere in that 40-minute range, so we leave a lot of time for any questions that you may have. I'll start the overview myself and just introduce the team. You won't see my picture on there because I'm by far the ugliest. So what we start off with is this mainly falls under the umbrella of Risk Advisory Services. Eric Pulse is our principal in charge over this practice, and he is basically in link and lockstep with Jeremy Bendewald, who oversees our forensic accounting and data forensic group. And the reason is obviously if there's a need for an audit in some of those situations, you'll find that Jeremy and his expertise in finding ways of how people might not want to pay you, him and his group are amazing at that. Audrey Donman is a senior manager in our Risk Advisory Services group. She's the one that would be leading the vast majority of the audits and has a lot of experience in that arena. And finally, Ed Soriano recently joined us. I've known Ed for over 10 years. He is probably, in my opinion, and I believe it's known that he's one of the top folks in the nation in this area of license and royalty audit and how to basically put together a compliance program and monetize and maximize your IP. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Matt. And thanks all for joining here. Actually, what we're going to do here is we're going to go off camera so you're not distracted by anything. We'll give your full attention to the slides here. So again, my name is Eric Pulse, and I'm a principal in charge of our Risk Advisory Services practice. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our firm, a little bit about iBailey, and who we are. As you can see here by the slide, we're a top 20 CPA firm in the country. We have offices in 15 states, as the slide depicts. Over 2,500 staff and 330 partners. While we have offices in 15 states, as you see there, we have clients in all 50 states and even internationally. And so we've got a big reach for a firm our size. We do have a big firm lineage. We have a number of Big Four on our actual board of directors. Lots of partners and managers and staff have a lot of Big Four and large national firm experience. Many on this team, on this team and in our license and royalty compliance space, we have collectively literally hundreds of years of experience in this space doing this sort of thing. And from an iBailey perspective, I mean, we love the fact that we're one iBailey, and we're for a firm our size, we have a lot of depth and a lot of breadth without the larger firm cost. So we feel like with us, you get more for less, perhaps. And in this sort of space, with our the size of our firm, we don't largely see a lot of independence issues when we're working in the license and royalty compliance space. When I talk about the depth and the breadth of our firm, I wanted to show this slide here to let you know that we do an awful lot outside of audit and tax. You can see that our service mix, we're largely audit and tax, but consulting is a large part of our revenue and an ever-growing part of our firm. We've got a number of services specialties, and we've bolded, highlighted a few here that really are pertinent to our licensing and license and royalty compliance practice, from an audit and a business outsource strategy perspective, analytics, and obviously fraud and forensics with Jeremy's team and our risk advisory team. And also we've got a large technology consulting practice within which we do a number of things, but really data analytics is a big piece of our overall solution that you will hear more about later on in the presentation. And we really touch almost every industry here, I think. So again, for a firm our size, we've got a lot of depth and a lot of breadth. We want to talk a little bit about why Eide Bailly when we talk about license and royalty compliance. What we're going to walk through here, we're going to talk about independent third party and having an independent firm perform license and royalty compliance and license and royalty audits. We don't have a direct stake in the outcome, right? We're independent, and a lot of times that that third party auditor, we're able to to work more closely with licensees, maybe get more timely responses, as in some cases these sort of audits can be perhaps somewhat contentious. So between licensor and licensee, and we do a great job of being that independent voice, as you'll hear throughout the course of this presentation. We've got a ton of experience. A lot of our team has a deep background in this space, doing exactly these sort of services. Again, a lot of large firm experience in a lot of markets, and we're not a large national firm, but we are able to provide that same level of service to our clients, which we're very proud of. And again, I wanted to demonstrate this slide to show you just a little more granular picture of our license and royalty compliance practice. It's got a huge consulting emphasis, with really three components. We're able to provide to our clients from a risk advisory services perspective with internal audit, and we do a lot of IT security things, and of course the license and royalty compliance audits. But the forensics practice is a big piece of that. From forensic accounting and economic damages, and we've got some examples that Jeremy will share later on in the presentation, and just how effective that is. And then our large technology consulting practice, with data analytics and cybersecurity and software solutions, we're a large Salesforce and NetSuite integrator. So we've got a lot of experience across a wide variety of solutions and services. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ed Soriano. Ed's going to take us through a little bit about some key terms and why license and royalty audits and compliance is important, and the benefits of the whole process. So go ahead, Ed.
Hey, thank you, Eric, and good morning, everyone. And again, I'm Ed Soriano, the newest addition to the team here. Although I'm the newest person in the team, I've had a lot of experience in commercializing and licensing intellectual property over the last, over 20 years. And I've done this for companies from AT&T, Honeywell, Mars Chocolate, International Game Technology, and most recently, General Electric. And what is the common thread of all these companies that I've worked for in the last 20 years? The common thread here is, although these companies are coming from different industries, from telecom, aerospace, chocolate, gaming, and industrial manufacturing, the common thread here is they take a look at their intellectual property and they treat it as valuable assets that can generate revenue for their company and for their shareholders, right? So on a very high level here, what is intellectual property? It really falls into 4 buckets that you see here in the chart. The first bucket is patents and technology, and this is typically what most people think what IP is, right? But it's more than that. So for example, on a high definition flat screen television set in your home, that television set is covered by over 1,000 patents that all these large manufacturers that you see out there, whether it be Samsung, Sony, Vizio, or LG, those companies are paying royalties. They are licensees of all these patents that cover that high definition TV. So patents and technology is very important in our everyday lives. Even your cell phone that you have today, that's covered by over 2,000 patents right now. And again, people are paying royalties to manufacture that phone that you have. The second bucket here is trademarks. Now, I recently was part of General Electric, and most consumers don't know that General Electric does not manufacture any consumer products anymore. Over the last 15, 20 years, General Electric has pushed out that manufacturing of consumer products and licensed it to a Chinese company that manufactures the GE appliances you see today, whether it be the refrigerators, GE Monogram, GE Cafe, to the toaster ovens and light bulbs that are above you and so forth. And again, why is this important for GE, right? Not only does it continue their communication with the consumers and enhance it enhances the GE trademark by sticking with the consumer market and not just on the industrial market, right? But a compliance program is going to help them ensure that their trademark is not tarnished. I can tell you right now, while working with GE, we ensure that our licensees meet all the manufacturing standards, and in fact, not just meet, but exceed manufacturing standards out there, as well as using the most quality materials to manufacture those appliances. As a trademark owner, and GE is a top 20 trademark out there in value. It's valued as over $30 billion. I give that as an example. They don't want a toaster oven exploding on a consumer's kitchen, right? So a compliance program was key to ensure that our licensees, again, meet and exceed our expectations of what that GE trademark represents. The third bucket here is copyrights, right? So whether it be a book, a literary work, artwork enhancing your wall, and I guess more commonly is the software, right? So if you're on a computer right now or on a mobile device using iOS or the Google software, that is all copyright and protected intellectual property. And again, licensees are paying royalties to use that software. And the fourth main bucket here is trade secrets. A good example of that is the Coca-Cola recipe or the Kentucky Fried Chicken KFC recipe, right? So they don't license their IP. This form of IP is valuable in which they are the only ones that can produce that taste, that flavor, that feeling of that product. And that is what keeps their value on there. So it's tough to replicate Coca-Cola. It's tough to replicate KFC on that. Next slide, Eric. So how big is this intellectual property licensing market? It's huge. Just on the licensed merchandise, on the trademark and copyright buckets, it's over $300 billion, growing at 4.5%. And as you can see on the chart there, this covers everything from characters like Mickey Mouse, the corporate brand, similar to what I mentioned with GE, fashion, sports, publishing, college sports, right? That's all licensed out. Celebrities licensed out. their brand and so forth, in the music, art, and so forth. And then on the other part that is key to a lot of the manufacturing companies, like I mentioned, on television sets and so forth, and the products you see out there in high tech is covered by patents and technology. That is a market that's close to $50 billion, as you can see here, and growing at 7.1% right now. These are huge numbers, and all the companies I've worked for, their intellectual property licensing program are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And you've got to ask yourself if you have an existing licensing program now, or you're growing it, or even thinking of starting it. You've got to ask yourself the questions on the bottom here. How do you know your licensees are paying your royalties correctly, right? So a lot of companies think that just as long as the checks are coming in, they're satisfied and they think that they're getting the right amount of money. But I can tell you, as we proceed with this presentation, that is not always the case. The second question is, are your agreements properly structured so that you will maximize your licensing revenue, right? Do you have the correct wording for audits on your licensing? So iBailey can help you in the different parts of the structure of a licensing agreement to ensure that you, the licensor, can maximize the revenue you can collect from your licensees. Do you have a formal license and royalty compliance program based on best practices? So a lot of companies I've worked for, they believe they have a compliance program, but a compliance program, you've got to take a look at it like any other process, and you've got to see where the gaps are, how you can improve it. And I can tell you with the markets changing and how manufacturers and licensees treat their licenses, there are always new quirks out there and misunderstandings of how they report these royalty reports to you. And then on the fourth one is, can we help supplement your compliance group by outsourcing some of these functions to iBailey? I know a lot of companies out there, especially startups, right? A lot of startups own valuable intellectual property. A lot of universities have a lot of valuable intellectual property, but they are resource restricted, right? So sometimes it makes sense that you can outsource some of these functions while you're growing your team in your company or university on that. And next slide. So I just referred to the importance of compliance program. Most people would think like a large company like GE would have a compliance program. They did, right? But you know what? iBailey came in there and helped them visualize some of the gaps they had on their compliance program. Again, it is important to always take a look at your compliance program, take a look at how your audits are run, and it is really important, I believe, that a third party can come in there and see with, eyes outside of the box to see independently and give the licensor an independent and constructive criticism on what is missing from their compliance program and how they can improve it to maximize licensing revenue. Again, it's really important that a robust compliance program is always looked at. It's always being improved. Like on this slide, I can tell you over my 20 years of licensing and commercializing intellectual property, I have never had a new licensee, right? So when licensees are part of a compliance program in which they trust, they will report correctly. But I can tell you in my 20 years, I've never had a brand new licensee sign up with a licensor and report correctly in the first 2 or 3 years. Typically, 75 to 85% of licensees have errors in their royalty report. And that's mainly due to the fact that the people that negotiate these licenses aren't the people that execute them, right? So people negotiate these licenses, and their manufacturing group and their finance group then has to take that license, read it, and try to comply with it, right? So there's a lot of misunderstandings of how they interpret or define some of the terms of that license. And I can tell you that 75 to 85% is very correct. For example, I worked for International Game Technology, IGT. I was bringing in $100 million a year in licensing revenue. And I can tell you, out of that $100 million in licensing revenue, 10 to $20 million of that $100 million revenue came from our compliance program, came from our audits, right? So the main message here is a good compliance program, a robust compliance program will help the licensor be more proactive in ensuring that they are collecting the licensing revenue upfront and not being reactive about it and surprising their licensees with a huge, money owed with a bill. I've had the licensees come out of an audit and they owed IGT $40 million. What a big surprise would that be for a company, and what reaction do you think they're going to have? It's going to be very confrontational, and they're going to try to settle on pennies on the dollars to get that liability off their backs. So again, being proactive, putting together a robust compliance program, you're going to maximize your licensing revenue. And Audrey is going to let us know how we put that together.
Thank you, Ed. So as you know, Ide Bailey was asked to join all of you today to share our knowledge and experience with you today. And I think you got a lot of that experience and knowledge from Ed. This is where my team and I come in, starting on this slide, and really become the trusted advisor to help you protect your brand and to help you ensure you're receiving that correct license and royalty revenue, while also maintaining that positive relationship with your licensee. Our cooperative approach produces the results that you're looking for, and those results were shown on the prior slide where Ed pointed out that misreporting has occurred in 75 to 85% of licensees. And that's really important. So our dedicated group of CPAs will use a modern compliance audit tool to assist in that collection of the correct royalties. We do this by verifying if the licensee is complying with the license or contract. And that includes payments, research milestones, advertising, or any other audit clause that allows itself to be tested by an independent party. This process provides quantified supported findings for negotiation and collection. Basically, we help identify areas of ambiguity or areas that can lead to varying interpretations that provide for improved future license agreement. So as you know, no license or royalty trademark audit can be performed in a vacuum, meaning this process is highly collaborative. And these bullets I'm showing here require that my team and I to work closely with those over the licensing contracts or agreement to gain that necessary historical relationship, those interpretations, the performance against the contract, and also the licensee's accounting methods, their processes, the system and documents obtained up to this point. The majority of the collaborative process leads us to tracking down this information and sharing the results. And the reason primarily that we're tracking down this information is due to a lack of an upfront compliance program, which I'll discuss on the next slide. So we just discussed in so many terms what is obtained when an effective compliance program is already in place, or what is gathered to start developing an effective compliance program. I want to now walk you through at a high level the big picture of what I like to call the outcomes or benefits of having a compliance program. First off, and probably the most important, is that licensees know Big Brother is watching. Surprisingly, this watchdog approach leads to higher compliance on the licensee's part, and they are less likely to attempt circumventing the system. Because of this, we're able to help maximize revenue with minimal cost, which results in a self-sustaining effort to maximize return on investment, or ROI. This is because with less audit risk, there is less audit cost. And we find that with an effective compliance program, we have payments that are made continuously versus after an audit or negotiation process, which Ed referred to were pennies on the dollar. So what are we striving for here? What we're really looking for is that royalties are paid upfront and that they're paid accurately instead of negotiating a smaller settlement after an audit. So this leads us to a better relationship with our licensees, which we find that payments are made continually through having a monitoring approach that leads to a better relationship with the licensees. This is because we are delivering a consistent message, not just to the licensees, but also internal to the organization, where we are consistent with how we handle our contracts, our requests for information, and identification of the red flags that would trigger an audit, which results in a feeling of a true partnership, which a compliance program helps to foster. And then lastly, our approach minimizes risk, which is really intertwined in the process that I just described. Through effective, timely, and consistent communication, both internally and externally to the licensee, individuals and also the business units see that a strong compliance program is in place. Basically, this paves the way to focus on monitoring current license agreements. And I believe this was said before, but done right, this really becomes a self-sustaining process, which is where we're leading in this whole audit process. Next slide, please. So now that you know the importance of a compliance program, I want to talk about the individual pieces and parts that help us to either establish, modify, or tear down and rebuild an ineffective compliance program, which really incorporates many moving parts. One thing to note is that this is not a canned approach or a one-size-fits-all. Rather, this is a tailored process that is designed for each organization's individual needs. What I'm showing here is just an overview of what my team and I will focus on when we're evaluating, designing, or creating a compliance program. You'll see here on the top left under risk assessment, this encompasses a lot of working organizations or departments, various departments that need to come into play when we're assessing the risk. This process reveals, after many iterations and a layered on approach, the type of audit that is needed. This is shown in the far right column under audit type and equates to either a desktop audit, which is a low risk, a light forensic review, or for larger risk and more in-depth forensic review. This compliance approach can be performed for just those licensees that the organization is currently having a problem with, or it can include all the license and royalty agreements, the entire population. Next slide, please. Whether we're tasked with performing a risk assessment of just a handful of the licensees, also known as the problem child or children, or we're tasked with a full-blown assessment of the entire population of licensees, we'll be looking at various attributes that we take into consideration when rating each licensee and potentially each agreement. Listed here are some of the sources of information that we are looking to obtain and build our understanding of the associated risk. Through our discussions, research, and requests for information from the various departments, as noted in the previous slide, includes like legal, compliance, and accounting, we will determine where to focus our time and attention, whether that is in unreported royalties, deficient reporting practices, or a triggering event that occurred but went unreported. And this slide will be available for you to download in the chat feature. There's a link, and you are welcome to refer back to this. Next slide, please. All right, so this takes us to the testing procedures to ensure that the licensee is compliant with all financial and economic terms. The licensee is less likely to underreport royalties if a risk of audit exists. And we mentioned that before, the big brother approach. In performing the audit, our dedicated group will review the licensee's underlying books, records, and system used to calculate the royalties paid or underpaid. Audit findings that we generally see are based on two factors. One, clear mistakes or miscalculations and or disagreements over contract interpretation and the calculation of royalties. This is where Eide Bailly's value is important and is utilized along with the multiple skill sets that we have within our firm. The testing procedures shown here are not all inclusive. I want to point out the bolded ones are procedures most performed and include, the first one that's bolded is testing licensees' books and records for agreement with royalty reports. This will ensure that the licensee is calculating, reporting, and paying royalties completely and accurately. We also reconcile units in royalty reports to inventory roll forward. The unit count in the inventory records may be incorrect because a transaction has occurred but has not been recorded. We see that quite often, and a reconciliation is needed to identify those missing transactions. And another step that we perform is tracing selection of units by order, customer, period, depending on that reporting detail, back to the customer invoices or the shipping documents. This is granular, that's a lot of detail right there. But same as inventory, we will compare the orders to invoices or shipping documents to identify those missing transactions that should be reported and included in those royalty payments. Next slide, please. So to summarize what we've been reviewing and what I've shared thus far, the licensing and trademark audit process starts with the risk assessment. This can be licensees already identified or a full-blown assessment of all licensees and agreements. Knowing what the needs are and the scope of the work that needs to be performed, my team and I develop a budget and approach for the audit. To determine where and when to audit a licensee, Eide Bailly uses a checklist, which is a tool to help determine when a formal audit may be appropriate and to help prioritize those audits. This tool recognizes that although all licensees should be audited, there is no such thing as an unlimited audit budget. I'd like to meet one of those actually. And that's when it comes to risk or the red flags, that there is no one area to focus on more than others. And there are multiple ways that we have gone about populating this checklist. We have clients who want to share in the audit process, as I mentioned before, that collaborative process, and provide the upfront knowledge of their licensees, who will complete the checklist, and when enough red flags trigger the need for an audit, they bring us in. On the other side is where Eide Bailly's strengths are, is we are actually the primary user of that checklist, and we provide our clients with the results to further schedule those necessary audits. Based on the overall quantitative score, we determine how to prioritize those audits. I'll just quickly give you an example of one of the questions that's on the checklist. Does your licensee include a detailed supporting schedule with their royalty payments? Yes or no? And that's basically the gist of it. It's a yes or no answer. However, we have found through our experience that there are ranges of what is provided. It's not just simply a schedule. When our licensees are required to provide supporting schedules or documents supporting their revenue, they may not be providing everything that should be in that schedule. And we typically see that there is an accounting or technical issue precluding them from complying with the terms of the agreement. So this is where, after further review, our technology or data analytics group, also and possibly including our fraud and forensic resources, which is in Jeremy's group, and we'll hear from him in just a minute, but we bring them in to help assist in the audit during these areas. So after we've developed the audit approach, we then execute the audit engagement. And from there, we gain additional understanding of the licensee's positions, their disagreements, any kind of historic performance under the license. And we will become familiar with those accounting methods, processes, systems, and documentation that I mentioned before. This enables us to assist in the drafting of what we anticipate to be easier to implement license agreements of those financial terms that our clients can use to execute future engagements. This concludes the royalty audit and testing procedures, and I'll now turn it over to Jeremy to share with us some examples of the royalty audits.
Sounds good. Thanks, Audrey. Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I had a couple of case matters that I wanted to talk with you guys. I think it's important to see the actual forensic accountings, if you will, and the work that we get involved with. This first matter, now I don't know if I'd necessarily bucket it into a royalty and compliance audit forensic accounting per se, but the concepts are similar in that we are reviewing, accounting records and things like that to make a determination based on, alleged calculation concerns on the part of the licensor to the licensee, or in this case, it involved an international game application software development company. So essentially overseas company that had developed a game for your phone. And they had requested assistance from us in ensuring compliance on the part of a US based credit card processing company. And essentially what the client had indicated to us was that the fees that were being paid to them, they had concerns that the processing fee charged for game downloads versus in-app purchases, things like coin purchases versus the actual download, they were concerned that they were getting charged a fee that was different than intended under the contract. And essentially the contract stated in part that the game purchase, for example, was charged at 3.5% of processing fees, and any in-app purchases would have been charged at a lower percent. And it was a combination thereof, but let's just say for the example, it was around a 1.5%. So the processing company in the US would earn a smaller fee for processing in-app credit card charges, but would receive a higher fee for game download purchases. So how did we approach this? So, really this is probably the complex part, getting access to the data, reviewing the data and things like that. And we had gone through 311,000 transactions over a 2-year time period. And the data came from data sets that were received from the processing company, including ACH batch files and things like that, some enormous files, let's just say that. And we went through the data sets, and first we tried to determine if we can discern from those charges whether or not it was in-app purchase, and like I'd said before, like coin purchases or starter packs or things like that that were charged, or were they truly game purchases. Now on the slide here on the bottom, you can see that we ultimately determined that 83 million of the 100 million were incorrectly charged at a game processing fee at the higher rate of 3.5% versus 1.5%. And in totality for our client, there was almost $2 million of an overpayment that they made to this US-based company. So needless to say, the client was excited and thrilled that they'd gone through this compliance audit, and we determined that this overpayment had occurred. And ultimately they were reimbursed by our client from these processing charged, and they also paid our fees. So that's just one example. Again, I give you that because most of our forensic accounting matters, right? It centers around some sort of calculation, alleged concern, or just testing, so-called compliance audit, as Audrey had mentioned. The next example, more in the royalty audit space, if you will. It involved an entity that owned a patent on a battery manufacturing process and the final product produced. So our client was concerned, a couple of different reasons. One, they were concerned of based on the inconsistency in quarterly reports that they were getting. We had heard that it's due on March 31st, and April 1st, 2nd, 3rd would go by. They hadn't seen the report and the royalties weren't being paid. Well, it'd been fine if it was a week late, but they were months late in that reporting requirement. So they're like, you know what, let's just do some testing. They also had concerns. So these are, the actual schematics of the batteries. They were 4 foot by 4 foot, if you will. They were large battery casings and large units, right? They had specifically told us that, we don't understand why they have 3 warehouses for these batteries, that kind of thing. They felt that they were overproducing and not paying royalties on manufactured batteries. And that's the interesting part of this, because The contract itself said that the patent holder was due royalties upon the completion of the manufacturing process and creation of the final product. So, and our client also, said to us, hey, we believe that they're manufacturing, but only reporting royalties based on the sale of that unit, not specifically at the point of manufacturing. So what's interesting here is, again, we're backing into the calculation for them, and how we did that for a 2-year review period was we did an analysis of raw materials, things such as casings, terminals, battery ingredients, the level of acids and things like that that are required to make a battery. We actually backed into the number of units that would have been produced based on the purchase of raw materials. And just to simplify that, how many battery terminals were purchased, less the number that are still in inventory, and the difference would be an estimate that were consumed in the manufacturing process, for example. And ultimately, we determined down to the last battery that they had produced 12,280 more batteries than were actually reported, which is about 16% of the total royalties during that 2-year time period. Now, while we don't know the exact outcome for our client, we just know that mediation was held and that it did that it did settle favorably for our clients, and obviously we were happy about that. So those are just 2 examples that I wanted to share with you guys. We get pulled in by Audrey's team or Eric's team, when hey, we definitely have a legitimate concern here, probably need some forensic accounting assistance, and certainly we think outside the box and help that team in generating thoughts, theories, methodologies, hypotheses, things like that to test the accounting records. With that, I will turn it back over.
Matt, I think Matt Youngman is going to take us here through the last few slides here.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Matt.
My apologies. I always sound smarter when I'm on mute. So other than the CP poll question, kind of the next stage is, we call it our full solution, which is either a turnkey solution or a cafeteria plan. But really, these are the 5 steps in setting up a compliance program. So where we can help you, really, it comes down to the setup. And this is the welcome package for your licensee. So when you sign a licensee agreement, this kind of goes through the package of what it would include and things of that nature, because why this is important is you want to get off on the right foot. And secondly, you've kind of moved from the legal aspect to the operational and accounting folks. So you just want to make sure there's a key delineation and description and mindset on what the terms, the financial terms, and the key contacts is. So setup's very important. On the governance side, this is where really is the operational aspect of the compliance program. Managing, tracking, ensuring you get the quarterly revenue and license reports, tracking the cash. A lot of times terms and conditions may change. And this is what we'll talk about. A recurring theme here is having a data warehouse where you can kind of encapsulate and have all this information. And then also, this is the part where a lot of times throughout a contract, your licensee may form a new company, might do a divestiture, joint ventures, right? There's a lot of things change throughout the life of the contract, and it's very important that you're tracking all that information. The third aspect is the license and royalty and trademark audit, but obviously Audrey took us through that, so I won't refer to that here. The fourth component is post-contract. A lot of times what we found is, people don't wrap up the contract. You should be signing off on the inventory, seeing what other terms and conditions are in the agreement. And we always recommend, a final audit being done, because you never know what the future holds. You want to have a relationship with them, but you also, you just want to tick and tie everything out and make sure a final audit actually does that. The last section is a license and trademark audit software app, or basically a data warehouse. IBP was very fortunate to acquire a firm a few years back. I call it Nate Squared. It's Nate and 2 Nates and their team. They do an amazing job. They could allow you to provide assistance or actually build a data warehouse, or you can build it yourself. But the overall general theme is to have a repository where all your information is related to your compliance program. Make sure the data is accurate and up to date through dashboards, etc. So you can basically report up to senior management or the board or anyone in your organization where you are in a timely manner. So our last slide is basically kind of visual of this licensing compliance solution from an information perspective. As you see, the overall theme is there's a lot of information that's coming from a lot of different sources. On the top left, you'll see that the business development aspect, sales and leads and things that usually come in through Salesforce, for example, or another CRM system. There's also the people in the licensing and the renewals, that the operational folks that are handling the relationship, that also is kind of needs to be managed and put into the data lake. Obviously, from an accounting perspective, on the bottom left, there's the billing and the cash receipts that go in. And then all the things that I just mentioned on the different aspects of the compliance program is usually run and operated or providing input from different folks within your organization. So the goal is to basically kind of have a centralized repository, get it into this data lake, scrub the information, and then it goes into what we call the license data warehouse, which is a single source of truth. And that's so important when you're dealing with your licensees, when you're dealing with your own organization, or if you're going to be having performing a license audit. The overall goal is to utilize all these sources of information, bring the information and make sure it's accurate so you can make timely and informed decisions. So with that, that basically concludes our presentation. We would love questions. We recognize that in a setting like this, it's tough or difficult sometimes to ask questions, but we would love your input or your questions. If you don't have any this time, or you don't, you have a unique or separate question unique to yourself, obviously you'll have our information. We would love to have a short chat with you and just be able to provide some assistance. All our calls and meetings and things that initially are not chargeable. We just want to help you with your compliance program in any way, shape, or form. But obviously, we would welcome any questions at this time.
All right, you can feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature.
Oh, while you're doing that, I can allude to one more point. Is if one of the questions or is what is our fee structure? It's a very flexible model. We have a time and materials model. We have a fixed fee model. It normally is kind of can be a hybrid of both. We're basically open to a lot of different avenues in working with you.
All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in. Any wrap up from our presenters here?
Yeah, Amy, I was gonna ask the same thing. So Ed, Audrey, or Jeremy, any additional thoughts or follow up to ponder here while any questions might come in?
I mean, my only input, so this is Ed, is we went over, gosh, a lot of information this past hour. We have to stay high level. I mean, just on the intellectual property side, I could spend an hour or two discussing that. So if, again, the offer's out there, if you have any other additional questions, take a deeper dive of your situation out there, feel free to reach out to us here at iBailey.
I'd also like to add, this is Audrey, that as Ed mentioned, high level on the audit program and the testing results and what we execute. We find that a majority of the individuals who reach out is more to talk about a compliance program or an upfront process repository that Matt wrapped up, showing what that data lake, the data warehouse, a repository of gathering all that information is really, I think, a value add as to what the entire process entails. Is we want to be able to categorize and populate the entire aspect of the agreements and get an entire compliance program in place and have it be self-sustaining. And whether that's a robust system, a data repository, or it's something that's more lower level, like an Excel spreadsheet, which we've turned around and cranked out in probably less than 12 hours and turned that back over to our organizations or clients, and they can monitor that. I would say the long way, not the easy way, but that has always been value add, is to be able to show where their population of license agreements are. It's always shocking to me that These license agreements are unknown to the individuals, that there is no monitoring process. It's a lot on your honor with regards to the revenue that comes in. They figure money's coming in, why shake the tree to find more? Because in my opinion, there is more to shake from the tree, and you're not getting everything that the tree should be able to provide. So anyway, just wanted to wrap that up and let you know that I always find that the compliance program is always the heart of the process and always a good starting point.
I'll just add to that, Audrey. I think it's always better. So I sit on the forensic side, right? I mean, I can tell you that it's much easier to have a compliance program robust, be testing, looking, and assessing the contracts and the data you're receiving on the front end. You know, don't wait for it to become an issue, but you know, if it is an issue, certainly we are ready and willing to assist Audrey and her team, or take it on separately, things like that. But ensuring compliance on the front end is always an easier bet, and setting it up properly to manage the data you're receiving and ensuring compliance.
Excellent. And Eric, here, one last thought from me. And I think that at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that what we've presented today gives you a picture of our really experienced team that really provides that full scope look at at license and royalty compliance, and really the name of the game here is maximizing that revenue, and that's really what the whole process is intended to do, is maximize that license and royalty revenue.